Hey, what's going on, everyone? So I'm going to wait a little while for some people to jump in, and then we'll go from there. I'll do my traditional drinking some organic coffee. Of course, organic as always, and always in some glass. Hey, John, good to see you. I saw some other people hopped in here. So give it like another few seconds or so, and then we'll kind of begin from there. Skip, good to see you. Let me know what's new. Let me know what you guys have planned for the weekend, if you guys even have anything planned for the weekend. Hey, Joel, what is up? Look forward to catching up next week, okay? And Preston, good to see you. And I saw a bunch of other people hopped in. Good to see everyone. So once again, drinking only certified organic coffee and in glass, which is like very, very important. I usually drink my coffee cold, honestly, just because it's like really warm where I live. But if you're drinking especially hot coffee, make sure you're definitely not drinking out of plastic cups because you don't want to get all those estrogenic chemicals in your coffee. And then most likely people are drinking non-organic coffee too, so they're getting like a tremendous amount of various biocides in a heated state, which oftentimes makes the chemicals a lot more potent as well. So all these things are super important to consider, especially if it's like a daily habit, you're getting daily exposures to these chemicals of some sort. Okay, so, all right, let me take a look over my notes, guys, and then we'll go from there. Jose, good to see you. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to use Need of the Coffee info. Yeah, Joe, we'll be covering that and like way more in-depth stuff in our coaching program. So don't even sweat it. I'll make sure you're thoroughly squared away. Michael Anson, good to see you, man. Long time no hear. Hope you're doing well. I have like actually a bunch of book recommendations at the end of our call today, some of which you like. I know you're an avid book reader yourself, so okay, so you guys, I'm going to look over my notes here. Today we're going to be covering how to use setbacks in life to help supplement and determine, your identity, your purpose, your passions in life. People have like a different word for it, but in a sense of how to get closer to finding like what's making you happy and actually enjoy your day-to-day existence, and how to use setbacks to determine that. And the next question is, it's actually pretty easy, and I'll teach you what has worked for me and what has easily worked for a lot of coaching clients. Because one thing that's oftentimes very challenging for people is just to find their true identity and live that out, so they're actually like enjoying what they're doing, etc., etc., especially when you consider social pressures and that sort. So I've used this with a bunch of clients successfully, and also used various aspects of it myself. And it's just very straightforward and generally has like a pretty high success rate. Does it work for everyone? It doesn't work for everyone, but I found it just to work for a large majority of people and just make it a lot more transparent of what you have to do to identify like your true nature, your passions in life, what you actually like doing, and then kind of go ahead and do that, because like what else is there to do in life? Like stuff you don't want to be doing, stuff you don't like. I wonder how that's going to kind of like turn out for you. Probably not too well. You could just look around you these days 24/7, and you'll see the byproduct and the result of that. So why is this? And the next question is like, why is this important for fat loss? Like, why does it even matter for fat loss? Why aren't we talking about nutrition and working out and all that like fairly important stuff at a certain portion of a fat loss journey? But typically what I find is it's usually the least important, and oftentimes the easiest to communicate as well. Because a lot of times when people embark on a fat loss journey or any health issue in general, to solve any health issue in general, they're usually thinking in the mindset of like, oh, well, I have to just like work out more, or I have to like eat better. So usually it comes down to like, oh, I just have to work out more and have better eating habits or better nutrition. And in some cases, people will think like, oh, I just need to take these pharmaceutical drugs and not do any of that stuff, or take these dangerous pharmaceutical drugs and do the working out and the nutrition. And typically it kind of stops there. People are like, well, that's all I got to do to solve my issues. But that's a very, very symptom management approach that, from my observation, especially doing this for 15 years, has like a fairly low success rate long term and coming to the resolution of the person's problem. And typically what they find is at best they get some short-term results, you know, they lose their 20, 30 pounds. And most often they regain it probably 2 to 3 years later or a little bit longer. And it's very obvious just by general statistics. I mean, like 80 to 90% of people that lose any amount of weight end up regaining it within a short amount of time. Simply because I find that these people most always just focus on, I got to eat better and I got to work out more. And that's it. It doesn't go any lower than that. But they fail to ask the questions of what led me to actually, you know, have this excess amount of body fat or have high blood pressure or poor cholesterol ratio or anxiety or just whatever. I mean, there are a million things that people are struggling with these days, and very few of them are actually coming to a complete resolution. So I'm going to go over how to actually, some tools of how to get to the etiology of certain behavior patterns that are leading to pathology ABC. So most oftentimes you have to understand that like 99% of the time is just the person doing it to themselves through like a belief system that's leading to a specific behavior pattern, consistent behavior pattern that's once again leading to pathology ABC, whether it's excess fat gain, anxiety, depression, lingering anger issues, short-temperedness, etc., etc. Jackie, Lisa, I saw a bunch of people jumped in. It's good to see all of you guys. Hope your weekend is going well so far. And stuff of that sort. So it's important because if you don't get to the etiology of any issue, whether it be fat gain or whatever, just the chances of relapse is very high, because pretty much like most often just the behavior change that led to the problem isn't being eliminated or isn't being changed to a statistically significant enough degree to cause a resolution of the specific problem. So an easy way of saying it that a lot of people could relate to, and I got this from a friend named Jator Pierre, is if you have a rock stuck inside your shoe, take the rock out and then put your shoe back on and walk comfortably. So that's an example of kind of getting to the etiology of a problem. Don't keep the rock in your shoe, but keep taking painkillers and keep walking with that rock inside your shoe, which is typically what the medical model approach to quote unquote, I say this very laxly, health is these days. Although from my observation, I rarely see anyone just take pharmaceutical drugs and not do any very, very serious and intense behavioral change and actually get better. And most often just year after year, they look far worse, far more unattractive, they feel worse, their skin typically looks fairly terrible, and they most always have also weight gain issues. And just to give you an idea, I mean, like 9 out of 10 American adults these days are considered metabolically unhealthy, and 50% of Americans are either type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic leading to type 2 diabetes, okay? So the problem is very serious, and pathology unfortunately has been normalized, so it's very hard to see that, because what we see is we typically see it as normal, but it's not normal. It's pathology being masquerading as normal, and then people just accepting it, because most people, they just either, you know, don't have the courage or don't have the intelligence or don't have the work ethic, or just are too sick to actually make behavioral change that will actually help them find true meaning and find a true path to their health or aesthetics, etc., etc. Okay, so and it all stems, and basically my point is, and it all stems from most often just a disconnect in the person's core values, presuming they actually even know who they are. So they think they're they think they're this type of person, but because of social pressures or social programming, whatever you want to call it, they're living a life that's disconnected from the type of person they feel they are inside, you know, and they don't want to express that person that they are inside because they're too fearful that the world wouldn't accept them unconditionally for who they really are. So, you know, they hide their sexual preference oftentimes, you know, they get into, they want to be an artist or they want to be a teacher, but they become a lawyer instead because it's a bit more guaranteed pay and it's a bit more prestigious, Although that occupation is very tough in itself, it's not an easy ride by no means. But they get into that occupation because they're like, well, if I want to, become a teacher or an artist, I'm not going to make enough money, and the world thus is not going to appreciate me for genuinely who I am, and they're not going to reward me, in this case financially, and then I'm going to find myself on the street, or my friends will look down on me because I'm not like a high end lawyer making all this money, or I'm just like a teacher, although I love it, but it's not so prestigious. Although the teaching occupation is extremely prestigious in my eyes, because they literally set the foundation to, a lot of what this country has become, for example. And a good teacher, although they're far in between these days, makes a huge difference, a positive difference in society and the child's life, etc., and they have a huge impact. But in short, it's kind of like, because of social pressures, they just do stuff they don't want to do, although they know they don't want to do it. They do it for social pressure, ABC, for financial reasons. In a sense, they're prostituting themselves out, and they're being fake to themselves. And another issue is that a lot of times people just don't know who they are because they haven't done the A/B testing, which we'll go over today to help identify that. And that also leads them to like a life of feeling empty and never fulfilled. And it seems like the more they're getting promoted and the more money they're making, it's like the more empty they feel, because they are working really hard. But unfortunately, in their situation, the latter is leaned against completely the wrong building. So oftentimes you see, for more popular figures, they make it to the top. I mean, they're like millionaires or billionaires, and they have all this prestige and all this fame and stuff like that. And then you find that they, died because of drug overdose, or, they have these alcohol problems or problem ABC. And you're like, what the heck, man? Like, you have all of this, but what's going on? And that could be an example of, yes, they achieved a lot, but the ladder is leaned against the completely wrong building. So no matter how high you climb, it doesn't matter, because it's not even in the right building. And in fact, the faster you climb and the harder you climb, the faster you go in the wrong direction, to the top of the wrong building. And the further you go away from actually where you do want to be. So there's that obstacle as well. And typically when these situations are present, which are most often just a disconnect in a core values. So again, the person feels a disconnect between who they really are and then what they're expressing or how they're acting in a real world. It typically leads to maladaptive behavior, because being this way and being kind of fake to yourself is actually very, very stressful. It's depressing. It takes like a huge toll on the central nervous system, because you feel it all the time, from the second you wake up to the second you go to sleep. And even during your sleep, sometimes you can dream about it as well. So it really just has an insidious effect on the quality of your life 24/7. It could be major, but most oftentimes it's minor, but always lingering and always there and always in the background. And it's kind of eroding your soul and well-being. And in order to be able to keep, living, and obviously, I hate to say it, but not kill yourself, you have to, the individual has to come up with maladaptive behaviors to help cope with the stress of that. And in this situation, what we're talking about here, these maladaptive behaviors could range from anything, and anything can be of clinical significance if done incorrectly oftentimes. But in this situation, we're going to be focusing on fat loss, because this is what this group is about. And what it leads to is typically a person just using food as a form of comfort, for example. So the individual in question doesn't feel like they have power over, how they express themselves in the real world. So they're like, well, I want to be an artist, but I don't know if I can make that money. So see, in their mind's eye, they're like, they don't have the confidence and self-esteem to express who they really are, because they feel the world isn't going to reward them financially for whatever reason. But guess what? They could use food as that escape, in the sense that food does actually accept you for who you are unconditionally. It always shows you love when you eat, that ice cream, or that favorite food of yours, or whatever it could be, or even alcohol a lot of times, which I would recommend, especially with alcohol, just like stay far away from it. I've seen it cause nothing but misery and pain in the bulk majority of people's lives, and actually contribute usually like almost nothing positive to the individual's life. But in a sense, they reach for this food and think about it. I mean, the food just loves you. It doesn't ask any questions. It doesn't judge you like the world typically judges you. And it just gives you, it makes you feel good. It just gives you love. And in a sense, that's what we all want. We want to be able to be very crystal clear about who we are deep down inside before all the social programming has occurred. And then B, we also just want to be appreciated for that person and not feel like we have to go so far out of our way just to gain love and acceptance for who we generally are, which is where the problems start occurring, you know, when people have to really stretch themselves and really go out of their way to kind of gain acceptance from society, although I don't even see why, because the majority of people are so sick, obese, and miserable these days. It's like, why would you even want to be accepted by such a sick society? It's insane, in my opinion, to want to even fit in these days. And in fact, it's like actually a good thing if you're not fitting into society these days and doing your own thing. It's actually a positive thing, okay? So, and in a sense, the person's kind of reaching for this food, and the food gives them love. And on top of that, the person has control over this food, and they feel it or don't have control over those factors in the real world. So in control in the sense that they can pick this food up, eat it, put it down. Once again, they can have love when they want it, unconditional love, which is once again all we want. And from one of my great professors, Dr. Donald Hoffman, and you can check out a lot of his work through interface theory. He's actually become very popular these days online. Great guy. And he said, you know, one time I was talking to him and he mentioned, you know, Eugene, like the greatest fear a lot of people have is not actually dying. A lot of people, you know, think that could possibly be their greatest fear. But really, the greatest fear a lot of people have is just not being loved and being invisible to society, like being ignored, just not being loved, kind of just being treated like, for example, you would see like a homeless person on the street, and oftentimes people just walk, they're like invisible. People just walk past them. They don't see their suffering. They don't accept them. Oftentimes they don't help them either. That's actually what people's greatest fear is. And unfortunately, they try to compensate for this fear by oftentimes gaining love in the wrong way, in the sense of becoming who they are not. So getting jobs they don't like, getting working towards titles and degrees they really deep down inside don't want, but oh, you know, I'm going to tell people I have a master's degree or a PhD or live on this house on the beach, although they generally oftentimes, you know, deep down inside possibly might not want it, although some of them do. They still get it because they're like, well, I could be somebody, you know, which in a sense, at first you have to tell yourself that you're nobody to really believe that you want to be somebody first, which could be kind of like a false hypothesis. And then remember, you can't come up with the right answer with a false hypothesis, okay? So that is why it's important. And oftentimes people just ignore this in a health journey and ignore this in a fat loss journey altogether completely. I mean, how many times do you see people signing up for boot camps to like sign a waiver here, do all these workouts? But wait a minute, like all of these issues that we're talking about are most oftentimes leading to the maladaptive behavior that are leading to pathology ABC, whether it's excess fat gain, just having an unattractive body, having health issues, anxiety, depression, alcoholism, whatever. Okay, and if this stuff isn't addressed, in a sense, your foundation is fairly broken, and you can't expect to build a good house on top of a poor foundation without the house eventually crumbling, even if the house itself is well constructed. And most of the time it's not, because the workout programs are bogus, the healthcare is bogus for the most part. It's like you show up to a doctor's office, here's some drugs, shut up, I don't even want to see you in like three months or something like that. Very little follow through, almost no emphasis on behavioral change. It might say like, oh, you know, eat a little bit better or stop working as much. And it totally goes out the window, because a lot of times the health advice from these health professionals isn't credible at all. Especially I find a lot of health professionals are like, you know, working themselves into the ground, and then have the nerve to say like to their clients, oh, stop working so much because it's raising your blood pressure or whatever, it's causing your anxiety. It's like, dude, why don't you set the example for your client, you know? Why don't you set the example by being very fit, lean, mentally well, and physically well yourself, And your clients would see this, or your patients would see this, and they'll want to emulate that, because who doesn't want that at the end of the day? Of course, it's not everything, but I don't know any kid that says they want to be overweight, full of disease, and unattractive when they grow up, you know? But look at how 9 out of 10 Americans are looking these days. Just go ahead and step outside anywhere in America, and guess what you see? That is what you see. And that's a byproduct a lot of times of living this disconnection, which has to, in a sense, result in a tremendous amount of maladaptive behavior to be able to cope with the stress of this disconnection here. So very, very important to consider, oftentimes overlooked, and oftentimes, going to be honest, the hardest part of a health journey. This is going to be the toughest part for pretty much almost all people in a health journey, okay? Just to find themselves, and once again, to be crystal clear about who they are and what they want, and then set up, you know, be brave enough to actually pursue that in life as well, no matter what that specific thing is. And also be discerning enough to know that, like, a lot of it could be from social programming, and be able to understand which part of it is and which part of it isn't, and go with the one that's more inclined to your natural instincts and stuff of that sort. So once again, I'm saying this, and I know a lot of people will ignore it nonetheless, but then don't be surprised if you're just never getting better, you know? Don't be surprised then. Okay, so how do you go about doing that? So there are so many ways to go about doing that. Here's one way that I found is extremely easy and very straightforward. Once again, does it work for everyone? No, but it does work for a large amount of people, and it requires a lot of A/B testing and a lot of intuition with your soul and your gut to know what's working and not working for you. So one example is, let's say you had a relationship that failed. Okay, well, instead of getting angry at that relationship, what I would do personally is jot down like what you really enjoyed about that relationship and what you really didn't enjoy about that relationship, and use that as a feedback, and kind of thank that relationship for teaching you what you don't want in your next relationship, okay, in your next path. And then it's your responsibility to actually hold true to those statements, because oftentimes a lot of people just what's the word? They might know what they want, but then they just settle, you know, for what something they don't want. So it's your responsibility to really be in tune with that. Write it down. I would definitely recommend writing it down for sure. And then that way, when you go on to your next relationship, you can go like, well, does it match my core values here of the other one, or is this a copy and paste model of exactly like what I just did over there? And obviously there's no point of repeating it unless you're into just hurting yourself mentally and physically throughout your entire life, okay? And you can do this with a lot of things, like even your job. Let's say you're currently at a job you don't like. Okay, like write down specifically what you don't like about that occupation. And that way, when you go on to the next occupation or next job, or maybe even next field altogether, you can look at those core values and those lists and then go, okay, is this reflective of exactly what I want? So for example, if you want to be working remote, but you're going in person, then there's a disconnect there. You know, if you want to be working with a caring boss that has very good sense of nonviolent forms of communication, but you're working with a boss that's has more of like a violent form of communication plus very demeaning, for example, then there's a disconnect there, okay? If you don't want to be driving to work during traffic hour, you know, but you're okay with driving to work, but not during traffic, but you are driving during traffic, that's a disconnect there, okay? And especially with like jobs and relationships, you want to make sure those are very well suited for you, and you're being very honest with yourself there, because you're pretty much spending all day at work, like 8-10 hours. Some people spend even more time, and then whatever remaining time you have, if you are in a relationship, you're spending in that relationship. So if you get those two wrong, I mean, you're really screwed at the end of the day, and there's going to be so much pressure and depression on your central nervous system that it's going to be really tough for you to think of good solutions of how to optimize your health, physically and mentally, and especially like how to be happy in life. and you'll just be on damage control your entire life, and no boot camps aren't going to help you. You can hire nutrition coaching, but most likely what's going to happen is because the stress is so high, you always self-sabotage yourself. You're always coping with stress mechanisms. So a lot of times what I found, especially with clients, is when I worked, I have like a very elaborate system of decreasing micro stresses in a person's schedule. And once I decrease those micro stresses, actually their compulsive eating or stress eating just for the most part went away. It's a very bad strategy, I find, to be really focused on just being more disciplined. Oh, I just need to be more disciplined. No, like that strategy doesn't work that well, especially when there's a lot of stress present in the person's life. Inevitably, relapse is very, very high. What I would rather do with a client is, once again, take the rock out of the shoe. Okay, stop walking with the rock inside of the shoe and taking painkillers instead. Stop doing that. It does not work. It just makes things worse because it never changes the behavior that led to the problem, and then the problem is usually magnified every decade by a tremendous amount, and then all of a sudden you need like a max dose of Xanax, 2 coffees, and a Red Bull to get up and be very miserable and just to have enough energy to like wash the dishes or something at night or even get to work. And that's the state of how most people are living. And they think like, oh, like I just got to change my nutrition around and work out a little bit more. And oftentimes they don't even have enough energy to work out safely or effectively. Now, like, what's the point? Working out takes energy. It doesn't give you energy. And if you don't have that energy because your lifestyle is such a mess, because there's such a huge disconnect between who you really are deep down inside and how you're living your life, you can see where your emphasis and where your focus needs to be on to create a good resolution, okay? So there's some quick examples, and you need to do this A/B and testing like fairly often. You could even do it with even small things. And you want to also write down, like whenever you feel great, you want to write that down too. So let's say you use a specific shampoo on your hair, or you get your hair cut a certain way, and all of a sudden you feel like a lot more attractive. Okay, you want to write that down. You want to write that down, like, I like my hair a certain way, this hairstylist knows how to cut it. If you go to the gym and you feel great after a workout, you want to write that down. You want to write down the type of workouts you're doing too. If you're interacting with certain friends that make you feel great, you want to write that down. And other friends that don't make you feel great, you want to write that down too. After a while of doing this and being honest with yourself, you're going to come up with a pretty hefty list of what I refer as a general blueprint of your core values. And then it's your responsibility to live true to this list. And look at the list and look at your current schedule and see the level of disconnect, if there is any. And then you will see where you need to close that gap, okay? And it's your life mission to do that. And yes, it might be tough, but also, guess what? I know it's a surprise for most, but living a life that you hate is really tough too, and follows you 24/7 wherever the hell you go, and affects people around you negatively because you don't bring your fullest self. You're just depressed, you're low on energy, you're all hooked up on like a million dangerous pharmaceutical drugs. And how could you be your best self in that situation, You can't. And that's why you got to fix it. You got to fix it for yourself, but then on top of that, for your dream team as well, for people around you to benefit from you being fully present in the moment as well, okay? Because you could only give as much as you have, and if you don't have that much, you're miserable, depressed, very sick. All you're doing really is just taking. You're not giving and contributing at all. So there's a lot more to it. That's an obvious, very brief overview, but just to kind of give you guys some general ideas of how to think of stuff. So some symptoms that I find, and it could just be in very rare situations, it could just be like a person's inability to manage a biological system correctly. That is maybe 1 out of every few hundred. And really, they do need just good holistic coaching on proper sleeping times and what proper nutrition looks like, and what a good workout program for their specific goals and their tasks look like. But pretty much for like 99% of people, I find that really is not enough. They really need to kind of dive a lot deeper and see where that disconnect is and create that change from there up if they want a complete resolution of their symptoms. and not just be running around their whole entire life chasing one symptom after another and somehow looking worse and feeling worse year after year, which is pretty much how the bulk majority of people are approaching their health challenges and aesthetic challenges these days. That's it. And results speak for themselves. Once again, I say this every time on every live because it's always the weekend. We always usually do these on Saturdays. But when you go out today, just look around. Look around. And 9 out of 10 people you run into, you'll see are just very overweight. They look very sick, very aged, much older than they actually are. And they just have this kind of like droopy look on their face, you know, like their soul has actually died so long ago. And, you know, of course, they're busy with capitalism and buying this and buying that to numb out their lack of existence in life, but it's not working, okay? And if you care about yourself, you wouldn't want to end up in that situation either. Okay, so let me see here. Let me look over my notes. Okay, so some other things that could work is the only problem with finding yourself these days, Josh, Phil, Anderson, Gino, I see a lot of other people jumped in. Jackie, good to see you. Eben, Lisa, good to see you as well. Daniel, Mark, Michael, let me see. Michael had a question. Do you adopt Buddhist philosophy as part of your training? Michael, I don't, not necessarily. I do, I usually adopt like a lot of stuff from like Paul Chek or Walensky and stuff of that sort. Sebastian, Brandy, good to see you. Josh, good to see you guys. Okay, so Michael, let me know if that answers it. Okay, but I'm gonna quote like a lot of books that are helpful for this topic at the end of the podcast today, at the end of live rather. So the other problem with people finding themselves these days is they tend to be too myopic. What I mean by that is, let's look at a typical corporate environment, which I find is like a breeding ground for pathology. I mean, it's very rare to find a healthy person in a corporate environment. Extremely rare. There's actually one on this call, which is a former client of mine. I'm not going to mention his name, but usually when you go into a corporate office, I mean, it's just full of mental and physical pathology across the board. If you don't see it, that just means your standards for health and wellness have been lowered so much that pathology is actually seen as normal by you now. But when you know what to look for, you will see the red flags, you know? And a lot of corporate offices, unfortunately, they just kind of set up an environment where it's really, honestly, almost impossible to optimize your mental and physical health. Deadline after deadline, a boss that's full of mental and physical pathology. And remember, leadership always sets the tone, tempo, and theme for the entire team. So if your boss is full of mental and physical pathology, everyone on the team will pretty much be the same exact way, okay? And I've run into very few middle managers and above that are doing well, like mentally and physically, extremely few. And remember, these are the people you're depending on for your promotion, your future, and stuff of that sort. And it's a scary place to be, knowing that as well. And it's a scary place to know that you have to look appeasing to these type of people, or they're not going to promote you. And that's actually one of the reasons why I stayed out of corporate when I finished college at UCI, because there's no way I'm going to put my future in their hands, because I know just through coaching people for so long already, 15 plus years, that pretty much almost all of them, I could confidently say 95+% of them are not doing well at all. And they have no intentions of changing either. And unfortunately, they're responsible for a lot of people's futures. And it doesn't matter whether they're good at getting projects done or stuff like that. That's irrelevant of what I'm talking about. That's not even associated here, okay? I'm just talking about them as a character in person. Some of them are well-intentioned, but unfortunately, they're just grown up with some mentality of like, you're not doing your job unless you're dying for your job, and basically have no identity outside of their job. And they're all about it, you know what I mean? So personally, if I was me, I would not want that type of individual to be responsible for my future in any way. So there's there's that. So there's a lot of there are a lot of examples right there of disconnection of core values, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of people have, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but that's what I'm saying. A lot of people have a hard time finding themselves because they're also stuck in these type of environments where they're forced to be very myopic because they're very stressed out all the time and they're eating a highly inflammatory diet and they have one deadline after another, shitty boss, some annoying ass coworker that they can't stand, you know? I'm not saying the other coworker is bad, but just like there's a disconnection between your working styles and there's always kind of some bickering going back and forth. Possibly also, like a lot of people get it confused, but finding your passion isn't enough. You have to find an environment that facilitates your passion as well. So, for example, if you love engineering, but you love engineering in the sense of building airplanes, but you're building cars, then you're actually in the right field, but in the wrong environment, which could be very stressful for you as well over a long enough period of time. Whenever you have this kind of disconnect of your soul and what you're actually projecting in the real world, you'll always have some type of level of pathology. And the greater the disconnect, the greater the pathology, okay? So you want to concentrate on closing that gap. And obviously adopting a lot of health conscious lifestyle habits and stuff of that sort. But a lot of times it's like a lot of people, they just have to get out of this myopic environment to think and see the world clearly. Okay, some people could do it while staying there, but it's very rare from my observation. Typically what happens is they kind of adapt the mentality of that office and everyone's kind of in this fight and flight situation. Most people are most definitely there, not because they want to be there, they just need a paycheck and that kind of, you feel that kind of energy, you know? A lot of people don't want to be there, so they come in with their little issues here and there, and they're definitely most likely not good at taking care of themselves mentally and physically, so everything's exaggerated in the workplace, and you absorb all that energy, and it's tough to think clearly being around so much pathology 24/7. And the sad part is pathology that has been totally normalized. That's the saddest part of all. Just people are just totally okay with living this way, and it's just so sad to see. It's so sad to see. So oftentimes, in my opinion, the best thing you could do is just get out of the swamp. Get out of the swamp instead of learning how to kind of exist in the swamp, which could actually become very difficult and elaborate. And it's just becomes so much more easy. You can see so much more clearly if you just kind of get out of the swamp of pathology and distance yourself from that. Some things you can do is, if you can't quit, is work 100% remote. Most people can do their jobs remote and do it well. And just having that distance, it doesn't eliminate everything, but it gives you a little bit of breathing room of getting away from the contamination and the toxicity. That way you can start thinking more clearly. And also because you don't have to drive to work, etc., you can have like an hour or two more free time per day, which you could devote to deep meditation, which puts you once again in that state of now and causes your mind to think clearly by getting your central nervous system to relax more. Because you're not going to be thinking clearly if you're in a state of fight or flight all the time. And you're just, in my opinion, and from my observation, totally fucking yourself more if you're just hooked up on anti-anxiety and antidepressants and all that stuff. You need to be really getting down to the etiology of what is leading to all these issues and ideally getting rid of those triggers or modifying the triggers a tremendous amount to really see meaningful change. Outside of that, you're just drugging yourself up, and just take a good look at yourself in the mirror. I'm pretty sure you're not looking too well or feeling too well at the end of the day, and that's just a sign that it's not working. That's just from my observation, of course, what I see from people. I spoke a lot about like my struggles with anxiety in the past, social anxiety to be exact, and you guys can listen to those podcasts for a much more elaborate explanation of like what I personally did. It took many years, and honestly it was really tough, but I was happy to say that I was able to finally get rid of my social anxiety, which was at clinical levels at times, without the use of any harmful psychiatric drugs. And in my honest opinion, in most cases, the field of psychiatry is totally a scam industry. In most cases, there are no absolutes, of course, but in most cases, it's a complete scam industry. That's just drugging up Americans and not helping them deal with the real problems, because it does take a lot more time for coaching these people and stuff of that sort to really show them good behavioral modification patterns that they could do and modifications to their belief system that they could do to really create lasting change. And a lot of follow-up. That's what good coaching is all about. I do a lot of follow-up with my clients as well. Not like, oh, like here, do this, and then that's it. Just hearing it one time is enough. Most often it's not, trust me, 99% of the time. The message needs to be heard many, many times, and there needs to be elaborate follow-up procedures to be able to make sure this message and this belief system is carried out and ingrained fully in the specific individual. Okay, so some other things you can do is, like I mentioned, some possible solutions that I found with clients that work great is working remote, to create that distance. Another possible solution is simply not using electronics so much, okay? Not using electronics is especially a form of escape. You get home exhausted, what do? You're probably on your phone for like 2-3 hours just to be able to numb yourself out. And the problem with this strategy is on your phone or Netflix or whatever, the problem with this strategy is also numbing yourself out can occur with video games, with alcohol, prescription drugs, whatever. And the problem with this strategy is it provides like a perceived short-term relief and escape from the problem. But in a sense, the problem never disappears, so you return back to it the next day. And you really haven't done anything with your extra time during the week to find a solution and escape for that specific problem. So it repeats itself, and then it repeats itself, and then it repeats itself. And I forgot the phrase of it, but accumulation, I forgot the exact phrase of it, but basically what happens is over time, stress, if it's not dealt with, or like anxiety triggers, if they're not dealt with, they typically are amplified. So for example, let's say a soldier goes on their first deployment. So deployments are typically 6 months long for Marines, or it could be much longer for actual soldiers in the Army. And actually, you would think since they're not that experienced, the first deployment would be the most stressful. But the first deployment is actually the least stressful. The stress accumulates when they go on multiple deployments. And it's the same exact thing with anxiety and stress triggers if they're not dealt with. If you don't listen to your body's many cries for help right now, you will be forced to listen to it later on in life. I promise you, when the crying gets so loud, you can't ignore it any longer, and you have to take action. And usually at that point, it's just you're so sick and so beat down and so defeated, it's usually very tough to kind of reverse the engine and kind of go the other way and stuff of that sort. So I would recommend using that free time to really practice the stuff we talked about today in terms of doing a lot of A/B testing, really reflecting heavily on in your journal, doing a lot of meditation practices, stuff of that sort, okay? There's so much you can do. I'm just kind of briefly summarizing here, and every aspect will work for certain people and not other people, so at the end of the day, you got to find what works for you as well. So, okay. Electronics. Some people also, like I see very often, using travel as a form of escape. They're like, well, I worked so hard and stuff of that, so I'm going to I work so hard and the job is so stressful. It's not my ideal job, but it's all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reward myself and buy a car and go on this trip to Europe. This, in my opinion, is a mistake. And I see people falling these traps all the time. Because instead of using that money to create kind of like a passive cash flow model somewhere else in order to finally get out of that job, or at least get out of that job to a degree and still maintain a good living, you're just spending that money recklessly on activities that are used as a form of escape, So I would rather you just, once again, take the rock out of your shoe and walk comfortably without the rock in your shoe versus keeping the rock there and taking painkillers to be able to walk with that rock inside your shoe. That's the key here, okay? So, okay, into today's society. Yeah, like I always say, and I'm going to repeat this today, pathology has been totally normalized, and if you're trying to fit in, you have to be insane to try to fit in today's society. Like totally, totally insane. Because like I mentioned, 9 out of 10 people are full of obesity, misery, and disease. Why would you want to fit into that culture? So it's actually a good thing if you're not trying to fit into not trying to fit into society today, and actually doing your own thing. I find it's actually says a lot of positive things about the person. So okay, you guys. So I'm going to list some books here. If you want to investigate this further, you can check out these books. A great program is, just right off the top of my head, is like 1, 2, 3, 4, Overcoming Obesity, Addiction, and Disease by Paul Chek. Awesome program, and a very easy etiology tree of why people continue to fuck themselves endlessly throughout their life and never change. Although, like, oftentimes they know they want to change and they know they keep fucking themselves, but they keep fucking themselves and don't change. And why this kind of cycle keeps continuing endlessly throughout the person's life. And then they begin like a cycle of cognitive dissonance, where they begin to justify their pathological behavior as something they really do want in life. And then that's it. They're so stuck in this quicksand, they're never getting out. So that's a really good program. Let me take a quick sip of coffee really quick. It's definitely not for everyone, but I love Stefan Walensky's work in quantum psychology. So this is my favorite book. It's volume 2, The Way of the Human, volume 2. You could start in this book. I would recommend volume 1. I actually found a bit more complicated than volume 2, but I love this book the most. And it's 3 volumes. He has many different books. Here's another one, for example, The Tao of Chaos. This is actually one of my favorite of his books as well. And it's really good at identifying the false core and false self, and how, like, for example, I know this is kind of crazy to hear oftentimes, but you actually are not your personality. Your personality is typically just the reflection of your social programming and who you grew up around, etc., etc. And that's important to realize, because that's often the first step to kind of see past the trance and come to a realization of who you really are deep down inside, and then live true to that nature. Okay? A great book by one of my friends is The Root Cause of Cancer by Paul Ledurski. So here's the book. I hope you guys see it. Awesome book, okay? And it kind of touches on, I don't know if I'm kind of misrepresenting his work here, but like low-grade chronic stress theory of disease. And he mentions here that if you have kind of any emotional pain that isn't dealt with and resolved, or any kind of, like I mentioned, the disconnect within your core values, etc., etc., that itself leads to cancer, etc. So it's a pretty interesting theory that I actually agree with a lot of aspects of it as well. So check out this book, very good. Another one is The Myth of Normal, okay, by Gabor Mate. So he's actually a really great author. I like his work a lot, and I totally agree. It's something that I didn't make up myself, but I've been preaching for a long time, and it's that culture has normalized pathology, and that's why so many people are so sick and hooked up on so many drugs these days, and looking and feeling far worse than they've ever felt in human history. We're in the worst mental and physical shape than we've ever been at, although we have all these quote-unquote advancements in medical science and all this other bullshit. And now I love the medical emergency community. Those guys are true angels, and I love those guys to death. Like I mentioned, I had one doctor help me tremendously with a really bad ear infection that spread to my jaw. Who knows, that probably would have killed me if he wasn't around. But in general, great book. And once again, it reinforces exactly what I'm talking about here, certain aspects of what I'm talking about here, in that we've completely normalized pathology, and it's normal to be mentally and physically sick now, and actually perceive it as not mentally and physically sick, which is the whole comedy. You know, a lot of people just don't even think so. I found the funniest thing was during COVID, like a lot of the anchors on the news, they're like, oh, even healthy people are getting sick with COVID. And I'm like, dude, what kind of healthy people are you fucking talking about? When 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically unhealthy, show me where these healthy people are. These news anchors are fucking dumb, don't even know what they're talking about. Just reading scripts most of the time. This is a great book, okay? The Wisdom of the Enneagram. Once again, identifying what your personality is, and then coming to the realization that you are actually not your personality, so you can finally get out of the trance of living that character and being an actor in the world, and instead actually be true to who you really are. So these two books are more for fun, but I love these two movies, and I just like philosophy in general. Amazing, amazing topic, and I could read that stuff and have conversation on that stuff for ages and ages and ages, and honestly find it way more practical and useful for healing mental and physical issues than actual like exercise and nutrition and that stuff. Once again, it's important. Everything's important, and everything has a place and time, but a lot of people, it's more over a belief system that needs to change, and more of behavioral patterns that need to change, than more over just telling people what's good to eat and not good to eat, or how to work out or not work out. Those are the least of their problems, let's just say. Once again, if a lot of this stuff isn't dealt with, you can go hire 1,000,005 registered dietitians, 1,000,005 coaches, personal trainers, and do deadlifts to oblivion. You will still have a myriad of issues going on, I guarantee you. So anyways, the book I'm talking about, this is A Philosopher's Guide to Fight Club. Once again, these are more for like fun reading, but they are very interesting, and very interesting perspectives, especially if you're a fan of the movies, or in Fight Club, in this case, the book as well. But Fight Club by Thomas Wartenberg, okay? And it's a Philosophers on Film kind of series you can find on Amazon or any other bookstores. But here's how this one looks. It's one of my favorites. Very cool. Also, obviously, you probably guessed it, but another one of my favorites is Philosophers Explore The Matrix, okay? By Christopher, I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name right, if I can pronounce it right, but Grau, okay? So once again, great book, a lot of in-depth, especially like The Matrix, it's a really good theme to what we talked about here, and so is Fight Club to the most part, because a lot of times they're kind of moreover alluding to this trance that a lot of people live in and under, and they need to get out of that trance to really experience true healing and find themselves, and then live true to that. So anyways, there's some great resources. Obviously, I have a great book. I published a great book too, called Laws of Aesthetics. You can find it on Amazon and Walmart as well. And but I just wanted to introduce these books too, because they're great. Okay? So I hope everyone is doing well. Thank you for jumping in, and have a good weekend. Okay, guys? Take care.